Gary Bennett, our Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, the Bishop-MacDermott Family Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience, Global Health and Medicine, and Director of the Duke Global Digital Health Science Center. As Vice Provost, Gary oversees all undergraduate education at Duke, coordinating our academic, curricular, and co-curricular activities, and helping to shape, as the screen behind me says, the future of teaching and learning. He comes to this role by way of nearly a decade of teaching at Duke, and that decade has been marked by consistent excellence. Student evaluations consistently put him in the top 95th percentile of Duke instructors, and that's a pretty high bar. Now, I'm delighted to have Gary's leadership from an administrator's perspective, but Duke is especially lucky that he has made us our research home. He is the pioneer of digital obesity treatments, and his groundbreaking research has delivered significant improvements in the quality of care, especially to underserved and low-income populations. He's also a member of Duke's Bass Society of Fellows, a fellow of the Association for Psychological Science, and past president of the Society of Behavioral Medicine, the nation's largest professional organization of behavior change experts. Now, you'll all be pleased, I think, to hear that Gary is also, as you've heard, a Duke graduate, having earned his PhD in clinical psychology, and better still, he is married to a double Dookie. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gary Bennett to the stage. So it's great to have you up here.
Well, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
This is just like we're sitting down in the Allen building, typical afternoon. So to kick things off, let me just ask, what brought you to Duke?
Well, you just mentioned my wife, and we just celebrated our 17th wedding anniversary this weekend, so I should say my wife.
Okay, that's good.
Truth is, that happened a little bit later. Well, the long story is that I was an undergrad here in Atlanta, and I was taking this class, and I was in this class, and the professor was talking about the connection between stress and biology and stress getting under the skin, and I thought, that's kind of a silly notion, and I might have mentioned that to her, and that was not a good thing to do, but she invited me into her lab, and she said, well, come in the lab and work with me, and I worked there for many years in this area of behavioral medicine, and much of the leading research in behavioral medicine was happening at Duke, so it was only natural that I would apply, and I was fortunate to come and get in. But the short story is that, like so many of you, when I finally came to Durham, I had that drive up Chapel Drive, and it was around this time of year, and the leaves were turning, and you come over the hill and you see the chapel, and it was like the sun, the moon, the stars, the angels were all singing, and it was very clear to me that I was supposed to be at Duke, and I did meet my wife, and we've had our girls there, and it's now our home.
That's fantastic. Well, we're thrilled that you made it your home.
Thank you.
So people oftentimes ask me what I think differentiates Duke. And one of the things that occurs to me is that we're a very balanced institution. We do a very good job of balancing teaching and research. We're right-sized for that purpose. We have a wonderful balance of academics and athletics. Tell me a little bit about how you see, am I right about that? And how do you see that balance?
I do see that. I see that in two primary ways. The first you mentioned, I see that our faculty really do balance teaching and research in a very important way. I guess maybe the not so well kept secret in higher education is that most of us faculty are hired because of our research excellence. And there are other universities who we call our peers that, let's just say aren't as encouraging about faculty achieving excellence in the classroom. That has never been my experience at Duke. I had literally more conversations about the inspirational power of good teaching on my job interview at Duke than I did in the almost decade in the other place I worked.
Yeah.
Someplace up north. And we really mean it. Our faculty respect that kind of traditional role. I think of it as the tripartite model of research, teaching, and service, which often includes a heavy amount of mentoring, of student mentoring, and they balance those roles exceedingly well. I'd say the other place where I see balance is really at the student level, and maybe in a way that's a little bit hard for us to see. So at Duke, we talk a lot about interdisciplinarity, and indeed interdisciplinarity is an ethos of our university. But when we talk about interdisciplinarity, we often mean it in the sort of research realm, and we think about it as it relates to faculty who is doing that research. But I think if you look at the student level, you really see students very prominently adopting an interdisciplinary perspective in their studies. You know, something like 80% of our students do at 2 or more things. They may combine a major with a minor, a major with a certificate. 21% of our students do a double major. And they often do these combinations in very disparate areas, and in ways that you sometimes might not see the connection, but they really get it. They see those connections. They're forging those interdisciplinary links. I was meeting with a young woman just last week in an advising session, and she's majoring in global health, in psychology, and neuroscience. And as I was looking at her record, I noticed that she also had enough credits to get a minor in French. And I just said, talk to me about this. Like, what are you doing here? You know? And she said, you know, I've been really looking at the news, and I think that this refugee crisis that we're beginning to see in so many countries around the world is not going away anytime soon. And the mental health impacts of that refugee crisis are going to be particularly pressing. And I want to try to lead efforts to pursue global mental health interventions in refugee populations around the world. And she was smart enough to know that some of the major NGOs that aren't really doing this work just yet, many of them are in France, you know, MSF or Doctors Without Borders. And she said, you know, so I need to really make sure I know French. I mean, she saw that and sees those combinations. Now, the real beauty, and you mentioned it just a moment ago about Duke, is I have a buddy who happens to work at Doctors Without Borders, and he's a Dookie. And so I was able to get on the phone and say, you've got to meet her.
And I think in many respects, because the students have that drive and they find their way around the university, they become this connective tissue that actually helps faculty identify new channels that they ordinarily would not have followed in their own research and teaching. So it's a powerful thing. And at the end of the day, that's what universities are. They're a place where the wisdom and experience of age kind of collide with the ambition and enthusiasm of youth, and that's where the magic is.
Absolutely.
So now in your own research, let's talk just a bit about your own research. You've developed these new technological approaches to obesity, including some app-based treatments. Tell us a little bit about what you found in that line of work.
Yeah. Well, you know, the obesity epidemic in the United States is continuing. We don't hear quite as much about it in the last couple of years as we did in years past, but it continues to increase and is really dramatically affecting all segments of society. And we've been very focused on the primary care setting, and there are lots of reasons for that. One of them is that, you know, ask your doctor is a very good recommendation for most clinical conditions except for obesity. Most patients don't receive treatment for obesity in the primary care setting, despite the really dramatic effect that it has on patients' health. And there's really good reasons for that. Doctors aren't reimbursed to do this, they're not trained to do it, they're not particularly confident in their ability to do it. So we create digital treatments that sort of situate themselves in the primary care setting and that are able to deliver a highly personalized treatment course to individual patients. They're very personalized, they get smarter over time, our patients use them. And we're able to then leverage those data and put those data in front of physicians through the electronic health record, in front of nurses and registered dietitians, to help all those clinicians to be more effective in the counseling that they provide their patients. And in the last 15 years or so, we've shown that we can produce weight losses and improve cardiovascular comorbidities, prevent weight gain, we can improve sleep and physical activity, improve diet, a whole range of clinical outcomes. And so we're especially excited about this because we can do this at a very low price point. And one of the biggest challenges for payers and policymakers in extending obesity treatment is cost. We can do this very cheaply, and we're hoping that it might be an avenue for a future kind of delivery nationwide.
Yeah, and now as you think about your role guiding educational programs at Duke, do you see similar potential for technologically oriented kind of app-based approaches to delivering, whether it might be services like advising or co-curricular information that lift the whole enterprise that way?
Absolutely. The central observation, I've been doing work in digital health for, again, about 15 years now, and when we all started doing this work, most of us, I've been coding for most of my life and doing the science for just about 15 years, but all of us who were programmers always imagined that we were coding these apps to get humans out of the business, right? We just wanted to create apps that would replicate what humans did at a very high level, and we could do this at very low cost and deliver it at high scale. I think the central observation that we've made in the last 5 to 7 years is that across a range of clinical conditions, apps do the best job at helping humans to do their job better. We can collect the kind of data, formulate it in a way that really helps individuals to do what they do really, really well. So I absolutely see a path for us to make greater use of technology in the undergraduate education space, but I imagine what it will really do is to help to amplify the efforts of many of the folks who are currently doing that work.
Right. Talk a little bit about how you've been able to fuse research and teaching in the classroom, particularly around team-based approaches.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, if you come into my lab, it's quite vertical, right? And we've had a lot of verticality's been very common in the sciences for some time, and we're now seeing it extend throughout the university. Best Connections is at the forefront of this work, and my lab is organized that way. So you have undergraduates, and we have graduate students, and we have postdoctoral fellows, we have research staff, and we have multiple faculty. And there is this kind of mentoring function that happens between the levels and across the levels. And undergraduates and trainees of all stripes are heavily involved in the work at all levels. It's most important to me that our students and our trainees are involved in the ideation phase, where we're just thinking about big ideas. Where do we go next? And this is sometimes pretty dismaying for my undergraduates when they first come to a big research meeting and there's lots of folks sitting around who have important titles and lots of papers after their names, and we turn to them and say, what do you think? But really what we're trying to do is to break down those barriers, because I truly believe that we should be moving in the direction of the best ideas in the room, not the most fancy people in the room. And when you give our students that space, they really deliver at a high level.
And that vertical integration you described is really one of our great strengths. We're a problem-solving community. That's what we do. We're not always the best at identifying the problems.
That's right.
And so when we turn to outside organizations, some of the most powerful things I've seen at Duke involve turning to outside organizations, having them bring us problems, and then we assemble teams, faculty, graduate students, undergraduates, and they attack those problems. The work done with the painting, for example, with the North Carolina Museum of Art is a great example of that, and the Data Plus program, where we bring together data analysts to attack problems and data sets that outside people bring us. Do you think that that's a generalizable model across the curriculum?
I do. I absolutely do. Our students get animated when they're really contending with real-world challenges, and particularly when I have a colleague who calls these challenges wicked. These are wicked problems. They're unscripted and complex, and there's no right answer. Those are the kinds of challenges that our students just really, really love. I find that to be a distinct quality of the Duke undergraduate student population, relative to other places that I've been. Our students are just not inhibited when it comes to the toughest challenges. And if they know it's a real-world problem, they'll really dig in. I was thinking about Mike Hageland and the work he was describing earlier in Uganda. He takes these entire surgical suites and puts them on a big plane and moves them to Uganda and sets up these huge neurology treatment centers. But what you don't see there, he carries medical students and graduate students, but he also carries undergraduate students with him. And I have an undergraduate mentee right now who's doing an honors thesis on just developing a health literacy measure, because she realizes that as patients are lining up for these kinds of surgical interventions, she wants to ensure that they really can anticipate and understand the kinds of surgeries that they're about to undergo. And so she's putting together this literacy project. And when she first came to me, I said, goodness, I don't know how you're going to do this. I've never heard of a health literacy measure that's been tested any place other than the US. So she called everybody who's written these measures in the US and said, well, how do I do this in Africa? And so she's put together this beautiful thesis that will have real world implications. And it's all a result of really involving our students in serious challenges.
Right. And what I love about it, the story you told about the student studying French.
Yeah.
The traditional curriculum, which is, served academic needs for about 100 years, is a whole series of required steps. Mm-hmm. You march through all these courses to get to the end, a major, a bachelor's degree. But what you're describing is something that introduces the problems, and then the motivation to learn more is built into the quest for learning. Absolutely. And if a student needs to learn French, they'll go off and take French, right, as opposed to just taking something because they were asked, right, or required.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What about residential education? I mean, we're heavily invested at Duke in a 3-year residential required experience on campus. How do you think that will play out over the next century?
Well, I think that, let me answer it this way. Close your eyes and imagine for a moment that you're back at Duke. Just imagine a moment from college. Okay. I want to know why some of you are smiling.
It was a good experience.
Yeah, right. I'll hazard a guess that most of you are not thinking about time spent in a classroom. Right. We have, roughly 168 hours in the day. Our students take about 12 to 15 hours of coursework each week. That's about 150 hours or so that students spend outside of the classroom, but at Duke. And so getting a residential experience right has enormous potential, I think, in amplifying the work that does happen in the classroom. And the risk that we face if we don't get it right is that we can diminish the kinds of activities that happen in the classroom. And so I think, good undergraduate education doesn't stop at the classroom doors, but it does think about co-curricular opportunities, and it thinks of the range of stakeholders that are engaged in filling that 150 hours. So that's student affairs and dining and housing and athletics and religious participation and the whole range of engagements that our students pursue during that period of time. And I'm excited, really, that you've given us the task of thinking about this in a more focused way on the board task force. And my hope is that we will come up with options that will help Duke to really accelerate its leadership position in identifying ways to really deliver high quality programming during that time. I think the other challenge facing us is that, no matter what side of the aisle you sit on, I think most of us would agree that we live in reasonably polarized times. My historian colleagues would tell me, it's nothing like Jefferson and Adams and the like, but it feels pretty polarized to me. And it's become popular in higher education to talk about specific groups self-sorting, kind of studying alone, living alone, and those kinds of things. But the fact is that we all do this, right? We all do this kind of self-sorting. I was on a plane last weekend, and I was looking at the folks who were sitting in front of me, and in the TVs, each of the TVs was turned to a different news station. It was MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. And I was sitting there, and it occurred to me that may be the only opportunity for those 3 passengers to get a glimpse into what was on the other channel. Right? Those are the times in which we live. And so I think that higher education and colleges like Duke have an enormous responsibility to allow students to explore not only why they believe what they believe, but to really respectfully understand why others believe what they do. And those types of collisions happen to some degree in the classroom, but they really happen outside of the classroom.
Right.
It's in the dining hall. It's in the clubs after a major event. It's in the dorms. I mean, I can just imagine. I remember sitting up in the library having deep conversations with my friends for hours and hours. And so we have to get that right. I think we owe that to our students and really to our country.
So I want to make sure that I don't monopolize the conversation since we have Gary here to talk with. But we have mic runners here in the room. And I will happily open the floor to questions that you may have of Gary or myself about the future of teaching and learning. We have in the center section here. We can run a microphone to you. And if you could identify yourself, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Nick DeLuzio, I'm a Nicholas School alum. Dr. Bennett, thank you for your words. You mentioned at the beginning that teaching has 3 components: teaching, research, and advising. I often feel the advising piece is overlooked a bit, so can you talk kind of about your thoughts of advising and the future that the faculty will play in advising at Duke?
What a wonderful question. Thank you for that. There's many different ways that I think we do advising at Duke. There, from a very practical perspective, we do kind of pre-major advising for our students before they select a major. After they select a major, they have major advising. That's usually housed in the departments. And then there is this other kind of mentoring function that I think where students find their ways to faculty members who really share like-minded interests, and faculty members either maybe through a lab or through a class, and form an alignment that can help those students to figure out their paths and to pursue it. And I'll tell you that advising is the one thing that in my work in this new role, this is the thing that I really have my eyes on, I think, more than almost anything else. We do advising well. We could be much, much better. And I can tell you where I think we could be much better. It's really what happens when students hit that campus immediately. It's during this first initial weeks where students are reckoning with their new lives and making sense of the curriculum and trying to understand their paths and dealing with mom and dad who say, you are going to be pre-med, right? And the student is saying, but I really am passionate about this new area, right? It's that transition period where students, I think, need a high-touch experience. We do a pretty good job. We could do much, much better there. I would love for us to get more faculty involved in that process. I think almost everything that ails us in higher education could be solved by forging stronger relationships between faculty and students. Just about everything. It is the one thing that I think many of you remember deeply, or the kind of relationships you had with a faculty member, that experience of interacting with a faculty member in the classroom. And getting that relationship right and getting it tight and consistent, I think is a real challenge for us. Culturally, over the last, I'd say, decade or so, that there's been more distance between faculty and students. I was telling somebody earlier that when I was an undergrad, I think I could remember the floor plan of some of my faculty's houses, right? Like I was in their homes, I was interacting with them deeply. And at Duke, I think we have an opportunity to re-envision what those relationships could look like. Right now, we have a program where we actually take dinner into a faculty member's house and have that faculty member spend an hour or two talking about something that they're passionate about. Students interact with faculty at lunch. And I think by the time, if we get a chance to do this in a year or so, I hope I'll be able to have a couple more ways that we can make that relationship even stronger.
Yeah, it is interesting that if you look at surveys of student satisfaction, 2 challenges show up on many college campuses. One is food. And the other is advising. Yeah. If you've been to the Broadhead Center, you'll see we've got the food thing covered.
No, we've got that. We're good there.
Advising, I would agree. We're very good. I'd say in many ways best in class, but we can do so much more. And there are 2 things that have me excited. I don't know if you would agree, Gary, but one of them is we can provide some technological opportunities for a lot of the didactic material to just be available to students. They can grab it when they need it. And build it into more of a curriculum. So it's not something that builds up over time. When the right question presents an opportunity to learn something, that's the moment you provide that information. You can't just shove it up front in an orientation session. The second thing is our alumni network.
Absolutely.
The mentoring connections between our alumni and our students are so powerful for our students. I think they're also exciting for alumni. And if you think about the experience, the life experience represented there, and you combine that with the life experience and academic experience of the students, now you're talking.
Yeah.
So I think we've got a lot of great opportunities there.
I hope we can find ways to help our alums to tell their stories in ways that will be available to our students. One of the foremost challenges for our students is just envisioning what a path looks like. All they know is that you plan your way into the next opportunity. And so the idea that life may be unscripted and you may have multiple careers or follow lots of paths, or you may be able to go to some distant career with a major that you didn't imagine was connected with it. It's just foreign to many of them. And you all exemplify that for so many of our students, and I want to find ways to really help you to tell their stories.
Other questions here? Anybody toward the back, or we have one up front here? Where are you? Yeah, oh, here's the mic.
Hello, Wes Gifford, class of 79. How do we build upon the power of computers, telephones, and networks, but still raise young people that can look you in the eye and have interpersonal relationships? To me, that's the biggest challenge of this part of the 21st century.
Yeah. Where to start with that?
Let me just look on my phone.
Yeah. I was going to say, I hope somebody will tweet my response to this, but I say this I mentioned earlier. I've been coding for 3 decades. I love computers. This is what I do in my free time. I've been in front of screens my whole life. So I'm just stating my biases. Our students are this generation. Really, the classes in the last 2 or 3 years are the first classes for us of students who have lived their entire lives with these screens. And we, frankly, just don't know about the impact of long-term exposure to devices on our students, period. We certainly don't know how they will affect their learning in the classroom. I can tell you that one of the things that concerns me most is that I think when many of us went to college, there was that moment where you just, if you're like me, nerdy like me, you grew up reading encyclopedias, and when you got to college, you could just sit around and just kind of revel in your thoughts, right? You could just imagine ideas and just listen to professors talk, and you could try to make connections and the like. Our students, the way I like to think about that is that you could just kind of immerse yourself in wondering what the answers are and wondering what these paths are. And our students now live in an age where wonder has ended. There is no wonder. Right? There's always an answer. It's at your fingertips. It's immediate. Sometimes there are multiple answers. Sometimes they're conflicting, but there's always an answer. And wonder is not something that is as familiar, I think, to many of our students as it was once to us. And I think we don't quite know how that affects our students, but I can tell you that the experience as a faculty member is it means that our students have a little bit more anxiety in their classes. They're a little bit less certain about what they know because they're always confronted with the fact that there is an answer just at somebody's fingertips. And so I think that concerns me a great deal. I will say, however, that faculty have been faced with challenges like these many, many times over generations in history, and our faculty will adapt to this generation of students and adapt and identify new ways of teaching our students in ways that will help them to learn more effectively. And I can see that happening in real time. Despite the impact of the screens on our students, I still think these are some of the most spectacular students that I've ever seen. I consider myself extraordinarily lucky to have already gone to college. I would not want to go toe-to-toe with some of these students, but I do think that the impact of devices is real, and we will need to contend with it.
Yeah. And the other thing that I would add to this is historical perspective does matter here. There were very serious concerns in the 30s about films increasing juvenile delinquency, because films were viewed as really dangerous for kids. Now we look at film as this, art form, and so standards do change. But one thing that does concern me, again, historical, the trend is that with the introduction of each new medium of communication, we're sleeping less.
Yeah.
And that does concern me, because this is actually a public health problem. And you see this in the students who are already prone to sleep less just because they're so busy. Mm-hmm. And so I think management of those technologies, just personal management and taking responsibility for one's health is an important mandate for us. Mm-hmm. How about from this side of the room over here? Sorry, the lights are a little bit bright, but we have a question up here at the aisle.
Hey, my name is Diane Ward. And it's exciting to see all of this and hear all of this. I'm a parent. I have high schoolers and college kids. A lot of my peers do as well. And I was wondering if you could just address the question of cost of a Duke education today, how the school is looking at making the access to a Duke education more available to more kids. I know a lot of my peers, for example, the Ivy Leagues, a lot of them are starting to cap the net cost for middle income and upper middle income families. Other schools are as well. And I wondered if Duke is starting to consider options like that so that the access to some of the things that we're seeing here today is more available to more kids.
It's a great set of questions, and I take it that's for me as opposed to for Gary, but we can both talk about this. So Duke is very much, we operate much as all the Ivies do today, in that net costs have been either stable or slightly declining, even though the, as it were, sticker price continues to rise year over year because of a lot of investments in financial aid programs. The challenge for us financially is that the year-over-year increases in financial aid are double-digit increases. And so our financial aid budget this year at Duke is $175 million and growing very rapidly. So at the same time, because we're trying to keep the full cost of tuition reasonable and maintain those net costs, the year-over-year increases in tuition have been floating in a 3 to 4%, close to a 4% range. It's a difficult model for us to live in, and it puts a lot of pressure, particularly on middle and upper middle class families, I think. So we look at this every single year. The short answer is right now for us, philanthropy, to raise more money for financial aid, because we can't do it on the backs of tuition increases. That's just not a sustainable model. So that's the short version of this. And then the other thing is to look at some more novel models where you could at least start to reduce costs, programmatically speaking. But that's tough because of all the things we just described, which are really fascinating and very impactful, but they involve significant investments. So I'd hate to have to trade the program, the quality of the program, against those increasing costs, because we're in a very high quality mode at a place like Duke. So what it translates into is a very, very vigorous and in truth evergreen commitment to raising money through philanthropy to support financial aid. I think we have time for one more question. Over in the front over here, I believe. Yes.
Hi, Steve Rush, School of Forestry, 1973. And you talked earlier about empowering people. Is Duke looking to the future, looking into people's inner life? You can develop inner tools to empower yourself as well, clarity, understanding,
Right.
inner peace. And I think that's a big missing piece in the university today. Are you considering including that in any of your future art offerings?
Sure. So the short answer is yes, and in droves. We have a new set of seminar classes being offered this semester in this very area to try to help students to kind of really focus on their inner drives and focus on personal wellness and on the kind of broader search for well-being. And those courses you might have heard at other places like Yale are extraordinarily popular among our students. Our students are passionate about finding their own paths and finding insight into their own lives and well-being. And so we do have a series of new classes. There's actually quite a few of them. There's a new house course that's offered by students in this area. This is becoming very popular for us. We have mindfulness meditation classes, the new wellness center that really focuses on this area from a more programmatic perspective. So yes, this is an important area for us.
And we have a wonderful asset in the Duke Gardens as well. My piece of advice to a lot of students is, well, I have a couple standard pieces of advice. One is make a list of all the things you're doing and eliminate 25%.
There's that.
No, to make time,
Yeah.
honestly, for that inner life to flourish. And make sure that you spend some of that time walking around the gardens, because they are extraordinary.
Can I just take a second and just address this question about opportunity a minute? You missed you a second ago. You talked about opportunity a little bit, and I just wanted to add something now that the president has said the important stuff. And that is, one of the biggest changes I've noticed at Duke is that in the last 20 years is that we are delivering heavily, mightily on extending the a Duke education to a wide range of students. And it is something that we all should be very, very proud of. We have first-generation students now at Duke who number in the 400 or 500, and we bring in 60 new students with a merit scholarship each year in this area. And these students are deserving of the best of a Duke education, but they're also changing the kinds of conversations that we have on campus. Just a really quick anecdote. I think of us delivering opportunity as one of the most important things that we do at Duke. It is our greatest contribution. And the last semester I was teaching this course, and it was a little seminar course, and I had these two students, my two best students in my class. They sat up in the front of my class. One was a man, one was a woman, one was black, one was white. But every time I asked a question, both hands went up, and they always had the right answers. One of them comes from a family whose name you would know, and the other one was a first-generation college student from a poor area. She, even though she came from a family with a name you would know, had a lot of anxiety. People underestimated her, expected things from her. She struggled to find her own path, struggled to find her own direction, struggled to get beyond her family name, and made great and copious use of Duke resources to find her way. Advising, she was in the ARC, she worked with faculty, mentors, she really had it together there by the end. He came to Duke, had no family support really, who really understood what it meant to be at college, but he was able to come to Duke because of generous support from donors. And I only found out about his story because I was giving a midterm, and he sent me an email early one morning about 6 a.m. and said, "Professor Bennett, I may not be able to take this midterm today because I can't check an iPad out from the library." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I went to him and he later told me that he had made it through 4 years at Duke without having a computer. This is a student who was just going to the computer lab and checking iPads out at the library, and he made do because he had that kind of grit. She now has a wonderful job. She's figured it out. She's on a totally different path. She's just blossoming, and he's on his way to medical school. They both got A's in my class, right? Like, that's what we do at Duke. We create opportunities for students of all stripes, and I just wanted to note that despite the challenges that face us from a financial perspective, we're really best in class at creating opportunities for our students.
We are. And I've met several students at Duke who are emancipated. They have no family support whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable if you imagine the resiliency required by those students to make it through a program like Duke.
Absolutely.
So it's good for everyone to have that collective opportunity to brush up against students who are coming from such varied backgrounds.
Hear, hear.
Well, with that, I want to thank you all so very much for being here this evening. I also want to thank Professor Gary Bennett. I think you can see why we're so thrilled.